So we just saw
Furiosa!
a Mad Max Saga, I think this is the full title, which is the latest installment of the Mad Max franchise. It's a George Miller who has directed many amazing movies that have all been completely within the same vibe. But let me not get ahead of myself. I've been a fan of this franchise since college when I've really watched the first two. And let me start by saying I am just a sucker for anything that is post-apocalyptic and dystopian, and also I'm a sucker for like very metal, very twisted, very dark kind of stories. So the franchise has always appealed to me, but seeing Fury Road in 2015 was like next level for me. I had really not seen a action movie in so long that was just so metal. You know, I mean, it's just so rock and roll from top to bottom. The sort of industrial aspect, the hard grit motors and gasoline and exhaust and just like nastiness and just like it's all so cool. This is definitely like a movie that I don't necessarily think has some profound story substance or anything. I think it's just kind of goes back to one of those things where it's just the level of world building, it's the level of tone, the level of atmosphere, and the stylization. I mean, George Miller's very famous for sort of these like sped up weird shots, and in the newer remakes, the colorization is really impressive and just beautiful. I mean, every shot is kind of this weird, bizarre work of art, and all of the cars, all of the sort of sequences and actions of death and you know, whatever, they're all sort of like, it's beautiful. It's sort of like a Cirque du Soleil style action movie. And the 2015 version of it was obviously the epitome of that. And everything, like 90% of that movie was practical effects. You know, they built all the trucks, they shot all these scenes. It took, I think, 5 or 7 years to actually make that movie. And so it was really impressive from a technical standpoint and was really a proper homage to the original sort of filmmaking that existed back in the 70s and 80s when these original kind of franchises were born and popularized. And I say all of that because it is a predisposition to Furiosa, which was really great. Actually, I think it was the strongest in terms of story. I think it was the strongest in terms of building the lore for the Mad Max universe, and gave a nice little taste of sort of what was at stake and what is being searched for by all of these wastelanders and these tribes, and what the battle of power really is for, which is the place of abundance, which is a place that is no longer apocalyptic. And it really highlights the level of emotional death and the emotional torment that all of these characters have gone through, that you can tell based on the world building, the atmosphere, and the character design, but you never actually get a full backstory understanding, and this movie does that, which is really fantastic. All of the action sequences were wonderful. I was gripped, especially for the first half of the movie. I thought the stakes for the main character were really engaging. The story was really unique. The events that the main character went through and the choices she made was fantastic and unique, I felt like. It's just one of those things where you're exploring this really gritty, like something that's so separated from your own understanding, but is cored in like an emotional understanding that you can relate with, which I guess is sort of the goal in so much storytelling. So yeah, I mean, the movie was beautiful, and I really have nothing against it, but something that was bothering me was much different than the 2015 version. This new one has so much CGI in it. And even if you argue that the last one had a lot of CGI, it was very subtle. This one, the CGI there's a lot of green screen that is obviously green screened. There is a lot of computer generated assets and backgrounds and even cars, you know, like so much of the Mad Max franchise I feel like has was inspired by and has inspired kind of car nuts, you know, motor buffs, motorheads, if you will. This didn't feel it was paying homage to that as much. It felt like there was a lot of stuff that in the 2015 version they went to great lengths to make sure it was a practical effect, and in this one they just sort of made it in post. I don't know if that's a bad thing. In fact, I don't really think it's a bad thing. I think it was just a weird choice. I think that was such a beautiful, fantastic merit that George Miller had, especially now, in this day and age, to make an action movie that was so stunt-driven and so spectacle-driven, to just make something that was very like Disney produced, right? And not to say it was. The movie was incredibly dark and borderline disturbing. I don't know. There was just like something about that kind of was weird. And I thought maybe to myself, I'm like, well, maybe it didn't have the budget that the last one did, but it had a really comparable budget. The first one had 150 million, second one 163 million. So if you adjust for inflation, they're probably more or less the same. But I guess I'm left with a question of why make that choice after obviously going to such great lengths to make a statement with your film about, in the 2015 version, to make such a great statement with your film about, sort of filmmaking and kind of, again, paying homage to the shoestring budget of the first one where you don't have computer graphics and you're just having to do stuff in the desert because it's cheap, to going to a movie that is very fleshed out. So I don't know if George Miller's considering this a direct sequel, or if it's just sort of a spin-off. I don't know, but I would love to answer that question. But all of that aside, that's just personal bias. I don't let any of that prevent you from seeing this movie. I still think the Mad Max franchise is one of the most refreshing reboots of any movie that I've seen, in terms of the fact that it is super unique. It's very challenging. It pushes your comfort level, and it's just so heavy metal, man. I mean, everything is just super raw, and like the sound design is very loud and intense and guttural and full bodied, and the visuals are very beautiful, and there's a lot of like intense, nasty symbolism. I don't know. It is a movie that I will for sure be rewatching, and it's one of these movies where I watch it and it makes me want to rewatch all of the movies that I've seen prior to it, like all the other movies to the franchise. Definitely going to be watching Fury Road again soon. So I would give this movie a solid 9 out of 10. Again, a lot of it's personal biasy. I'm just a sucker for post-apocalyptic stuff. I'm a sucker for the vibe that movie gives. So, but definitely see it. I think it's worth seeing in theaters. But it's going to be on Max in like 15 minutes. So you can just watch it then. All right. Bye.